The next attitude I want to talk to you about is the attitude of expectation. It's almost impossible to operate with cooperation, with excellence, with attitude, unless first you know what is expected of you. If you don't know what your job title is, how do you know what your limitations are, what you have access to, what you have authority to do? How can you operate properly in a functioning team if there are no assigned roles and expectations for the people on the team? How will you know what your goals are, or when you've had a victory, or when you've had a win, if no one tells you what a goal or a victory or a win looks like? Unfortunately, these are really common things in many workplaces, many work environments, and even in school systems sometimes. The challenges in relationships are unbelievable when those goals and when those expectations are not set up. Expectation as an attitude is based around some really simple steps that are not hard to take as far as executing them, but it requires discipline to do them. So here are those 4 very specific things that we need to do for an attitude of expectation to be present in all of our relationships. We have to have clearly established goals. By that I mean, if you know that you have to have all of your reports done by 4 p.m. on Friday, not 4:05, then you need to be clear that that's what the goal is. Don't come around at 5 minutes till 4 and go, I needed those at 4 o'clock. That's not a clearly established goal. A clearly expressed goal goes right along with that. You can't arbitrarily establish a goal and not tell anybody about it. My expectation of you in this job is show up at 5 o'clock, leave at 10 o'clock. That doesn't mean show up at 5 o'clock and clock in by 5:15. If you need to be here at 4:55 and clock in by 5 o'clock, then perfect. But that's what I expect of you, is that when I look at the time card, you've clocked in at 5 o'clock, give or take a minute or two. And that you've clocked out at or around 10 o'clock, give or take a minute or two. Extenuating circumstances are understandable, but those are my expectations. Anything else will be an exception to the rule. When those goals are clearly established and clearly expressed, then it's really easy to set up a system that rewards achievement and does not reward penalty. Here's what I mean by that. How many times have you seen someone who stands there at the time clock waiting for the time to click over and then they clock in? And yet when it's time to leave, they don't wait for the time clock to clock out. They just rush back there and punch out. Usually that doesn't happen. What usually happens is they kind of drag themselves in the door and they punch in whenever they can get in the door. And then when it's time to go, they want to make sure that they milk that. They may stop working 15 or 20 minutes early, but they want to punch out right on time. That contrasting idea, that attitude of entitlement, again, it obviously does not operate within the attitude of expectation or the attitude of excellence. But excellence will not be achieved if there is no expectation established. Excellence will also not be achieved if there is no penalty for failure or there is no penalty for slacking. If excellence is the standard, then excellence should be rewarded, and anything short of that should either be simply acknowledged and not rewarded, or at least in some way penalized. So if you say the work schedule is 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., and you show up at 4:55, and you clock in at 4:55, and you stay in your work till 10:05, if that's within the realm of expectations, that's incredible. But if that 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after adds up to overtime, then that extra 10 minutes, you're really just kind of milking the clock. So if I didn't get all that work out of you, then we're going to have to penalize you. By next week, you're going to be scheduled for 1 hour less to make up the time that you rode the clock, and the other way. The same thing might be true if there's a labor statistic. I need you to unpack and shelve 22 boxes in the time that you're here. I need you to answer or receive 25 phone calls and process the data. I need you to turn in this report, generate this many sales, write this new marketing plan, whatever that strategic goal is that has to be accomplished, needs to be clearly expressed so that someone knows I have achieved that goal or I haven't achieved that goal. In addition to clearly expressing the goals, though, reward for achievement versus penalty needs to be very clear as well. If you clock in and ride the clock for 20 minutes before you actually start work, you will be docked an hour. If you do that 3 times, you will lose your job. When the person finds themselves in a challenge as a leader, as a manager, is when they don't express those goals, those penalties, or those rewards up front. And they find themselves trying to get rid of an employee for what everyone else sees as no cause. Because their desire, their expectations have never been clear. No one knows how to live up to them or not live up to them. And I think we've probably all encountered, if we've been in the workforce for any length of time, or even been in a relationship for any length of time, we've encountered someone that we see working toward an expectation that we've never outlined. We also probably see someone get really upset when we don't live up to an expectation they have, but they've never expressed. I remember being married only 2 weeks when my mom called me at work. She's never called me at work before that date, and maybe only once or twice since then. I'd been married 2 weeks, and she calls me and she says, "How could you marry such a bee?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "I called your new bride at home to talk about the grandkids, and we were going to get to see you guys and everything." And I don't even know what to say. She wouldn't say 5 words to me. And I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, she's got another thing coming. If she's that stuck up, she thinks she doesn't have to talk to me. That's just wrong. And I'm not going to tolerate that. When the grandkids come and I want to come see them, there better be a door open. And when the grandkids come, you better be coming down here to see me, and I don't care if she comes or not." And all of a sudden there was this whole attitude, this whole rage around the fact that my mom talks as much as I do. And her expectation, although never clearly voiced, never clearly expressed, was that my wife would talk just as much. My wife doesn't say 20 words most of the time in the course of a day. We can sit hours together and she doesn't say anything. I ask her deep, complicated questions, and she's an intelligent, educated woman. And the answers I get are, yep. She's just not vocally expressive. That's not her nature. But there's now a friction in the relationship because of an unmet expectation. And the threat of penalty was immediate and harsh. She's got another thing coming. You're never going to keep those grandkids from me. I won't be treated this way, because the expectations were never clearly expressed. So you can imagine how that might work in the workplace, how it might work in school, how it might work in other relationships as well. And finally, expectation creates this very unique aspect of a relationship that goes unseen because it's kind of an intrinsic thing. It creates a self-imposed motivator. And those motivators become identified usually by a really good leader who looks to someone and says, for an example, they don't want to disappoint me. I've set out my expectations, and I can see by the way that they operate, they don't intend to just meet them. They want to exceed them, and they want to be recognized for it. Now, other people, their motivators may be completely different. Their motivators may be, I want to get a paycheck, I want to get a raise, I want to get moved into the next position. I'm only here for this job to get all my ducks in a row and make sure that I have everything lined up when I finish my education and move into the next aspect, or I'm only here for the training, whatever it is. But those motivators, those self-imposed motivators, become clearly identified when expectations are set up. So you may set up an expectation and say, I need you here at 5 o'clock. And the person says, I got no problem being here at 5 o'clock, but my body clock just doesn't work after 9. So I'd rather come in at 4 and work till 9. Can I do the same amount of work in the same period of time, but in a different time slot? Oh, that's a little different. Or, my kid's soccer game is usually over by 6 o'clock. Could I work maybe 6 to 11 or even 6:30 to 11:30? The same amount of time doing the same amount of work, but in a different time slot so that I can spend more time with my kids? Now you're beginning to see an identified motivator that's completely outside the scope of work. But when things like that happen, those expectations can be set up, The attitude of expectation can be put in place, and you might hear indicative phrases by a good leader, a good influencer who uses the attitude of expectation in a proper way. They may say things like this: I know that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. They might say, your work exceeds the standards. You always set the bar higher. See, those are the kind of things that, when those are expressed, they motivate someone even further. Because normally someone who is just a wee bit of an overachiever is someone who is really motivated by the words that you say to them. Now, they probably like chocolate and paychecks as well, but it's that pat on the back that says, I recognize what you've done, that really pushes them on. So if you want to see your team, your organization, your community, your relationships, whether it's parents, teachers, spouses, you want to see those move to the next level, I really encourage you to begin to set up those expectations, even if they're very subtle hints. You know, my boys have an expectation when we leave the house and we're going to be gone for a couple of days. The kitchen is clean, the dishes are done, the floors are mopped, the floors are vacuumed. And it doesn't matter if you have to be up till 1 o'clock in the morning to get that done before you go to bed. My expectation is we will not leave the house and come back to a mess. It will be as spotless as we can leave it before we go to bed that night. So that's an expectation that I've set up for them. Over the period of time that expectation has been in place, I very seldom even have to express it anymore, rather with reward or with penalty. I simply say, is this the way we want to come home? And that expectation is an unspoken motivator to them. Those are the kind of things that I'm talking about. That's the type of leadership influence that I believe we can have in our family, in our relationships, in our communities, in our workplace, in our schools. When we have an attitude of expectation that's clearly expressed, we know what the goals are, we know how to express them, we know what happens if we reach them, and what we know what happens if we fail, and we motivate people from an internal, intrinsic way by setting up those expectations, rather than pounding them over the head going, I'm going to fire you if you don't get this done, which is more of the tyrannical leadership kind of an idea. So express clearly the goals that you have for the people around you and operate deeply with an attitude of expectation.